Good afternoon, and thanks for clicking on to the Monday edition of Vogan's European Outlook. It was a good weekend just gone. We had the live stream yesterday looking at the February Outlook, and while days are growing ever longer, the cold may be gaining strength once again, and the coldest of the entire winter may still be upon us, believe it or not. Thanks for clicking on to today's European Outlook. I hope everybody is safe and well and had a good weekend. I will leave a link in the description below today's video for this live stream yesterday if you want to look back on it. It was around 57 minutes long. It was a good one, good interaction with everybody. And if you haven't tuned into any of the live streams so far here on Mark Vogan Weather, you can do so every Sunday at 4 o'clock. The Global Weather and Climate Live will be back next Sunday at 4 p.m., the usual time. But we do have a lot going on. We do have a chance of some potentially very cold conditions building and brewing as we move through the next week or 2 weeks or so. You can see here, this is the current setup according to the GFS. We've got a 937 millibar low between the north shore of Iceland, east coast of Greenland here. We've got a very strong area of high pressure into the 1030s and millibars over the near continent. Southwesterly flow means we've got windy conditions, but also rather mild conditions across western and northern areas. Underneath the center of the high, we've got the chillier air present, and that chillier theme is influencing the southeastern half of the UK. We've got this setup that really occurred during once we transitioned from cold back to somewhat milder during the 12th, 13th of January. This is a bit of a repeat in terms of the overall pattern. But while we've got these deep areas of low pressure up near Iceland and Greenland, we're transporting a lot of milder all the way up into the Arctic region. What that's going to do is it's going to force the AO, the Arctic oscillation, to go very deeply negative, as can be seen here depicted by the GFS ensemble. You can see that we're positive at the moment, but it tanks very deep indeed. Some of the members are indicating that we go to -5, -6 sigma below the neutral line, which is in rare territory to say the least. But the reasons for that has been pointed out. We've got two areas of anomalous high pressure that is building into the Arctic region, and that's going to start to influence the stratospheric circulation. We're going to see a strong warming taking place here. And essentially what happens in the kind of nearer term, and we do have a very, very strong probability now of seeing a strong near 1060 high centered over Scandinavia. That's going to start to transport cooler air westwards underneath the high towards Western Europe. But it's the influence of what's going on within the troposphere that's going to affect the stratosphere towards the middle portions of the month. And in turn, that then leads to something later down the road. So we've got essentially two situations to watch carefully. What's going on in the initial time frame, the near term, but also what happens in the longer term based on what's going on in the near term. I hope that makes sense. But you can see here, this is the two phases of the AO. We've got the positive phase, which means that we tighten the cold pull up over the Arctic region. That strengthens the westerly flow and floods both North America and Europe with ocean air, whether it be Pacific or Atlantic. When you've got a negative Arctic oscillation, and essentially usually this is caused by the transport of warmth up from low latitudes to high latitudes, that then forces a buildup of pressure up into the Arctic region. It disrupts the overall circulation within the polar vortex and allows lobes of this cold. As you get surges of warmth northwards, you've got the cold getting displaced and pushed southwards. In turn, it buckles the jet stream and it creates these greater extremes, so to speak, in terms of cold versus warm. The North Atlantic oscillation, as a quick reminder in case people are not sure, this is the positive phase, which means that you've got the lower pressure up towards Greenland and Iceland. You've got higher pressure down near the Azores, and you've got quite a strong Atlantic jet stream driving Atlantic air milder into western areas of Europe. That leads to warm and wet conditions across northwest Europe, and it leads to cool, dry conditions across the Mediterranean and southern Europe. When you've got a negative North Atlantic oscillation, you essentially have the opposite. You've got a weaker Icelandic low. Usually you've got a buildup of pressure up towards Iceland and Greenland here. You've got a weaker high, and usually you've got a trough displaced to the south. So you're almost reversing the height field at 500 millibars. You've got higher pressure up near Greenland. You've got lower pressure down towards the Azores. That is your negative NAO. You've got usually cold, dry conditions across UK, Ireland, and northwestern Europe. Mild and wet down across the Mediterranean basin. So that is a quick reminder of what the AO and the NAO are. And as can be seen here, the Arctic oscillation, once it drops below this line here, it drops into negative territory, and that's exactly what we are expecting to see. Now, another factor that needs to be taken into consideration, you've got the displacement of the polar vortex. We've got this strong warming showing up now by pretty much all the models here. NAO is following suit with the AO, but also the Mandrelian oscillation is in phases 5 at the moment. This is mild phases, and we generally have a relatively mild pattern at the moment here. Atlantic air getting driven into northwestern Europe. We've also got atmospheric rivers and mild conditions driving into the west coast of both Canada and the northwestern United States. That's driving Pacific air across the lower 48. So you've got this situation at the moment. We've got a reasonably flat jet associated with this current pattern, but you can see that the members now are indicating in the day 5 through 15 that the NAO, the MJO is trying to go back into phases 6, 7, and 8. Once you get into phases 7 and 8, by the way, those are cold promoting phases. That tends to promote the negative Arctic oscillation, the negative North Atlantic oscillation. So things are certainly looking very interesting when it comes to a cold perspective. So let's move on and see what happens. Now, this is as we move through the course of tomorrow. We've got a westerly airflow, but we do have some colder embedded within that flow, so it's not overly mild. We've got a mixture of rain, sleet, and snow moving in off the Atlantic. You've got higher pressure then starts to build in midweek onwards. Pressure starts to build rather strongly indeed, close to 10-50 millibars in some places around the North Sea, southern portions of Norway. But notice here that as we start to see changes taking place, that high then gets lifted northeastwards away from the UK, and then it hooks up with another area of high pressure, 1055 millibars over Western Russia. As this entire system grows in strength and geography, essentially, you're starting to increase the size of this area of high pressure. Once that starts to get lifted northwards, we then start to see colder air getting driven into central areas of Europe, because a couple of folks have said we don't have an awful lot of cold air over Central Europe at the moment, so how is it going to turn cold? Well, it's once this pattern then starts to evolve, and it's really once you get to the end of this week, that's when things start to become more conducive. We shut down the Atlantic, you're then starting to push easterly winds further and further west over the continent. If you look at the 850s here, we start to see this. So go back to the here now, and you can see here that we've got this cold polar maritime air, ocean modified, of course, moving into the UK here. So that's a reasonable lobe of cold air according to GFS. By the time we reach the mid-week point, we've got this area of high pressure to the south of Ireland. Continue to play through. We're starting to see that cold air getting projected eastwards. We're back in the milder flow once again. So again, even Thursday, we're not looking at particularly cold air over northern UK. But watch what's happening. We're starting to get colder conditions now developing central eastern areas of Europe. That then gets shifted westwards underneath that 1050 plus high, and it's as we continue to play through, this is when it really does start to become a very interesting situation. Now, the air mass does moderate in some respects, and then we see a bit of a reload showing up by the models as well. But continue to play through. You can see this next batch of particularly cold air seen by the GFS wrapping around the top and the eastern side of the high that is now centered over more Norway and Sweden, if you notice here. But this is allowing to pick up some of that potent cold air. Remember, the polar vortex has been rather strong, so there's been a buildup of cold over the Arctic region in the last couple of weeks here. So once we start to see this high start to affect the depth of the troposphere, starts to influence the stratosphere, creates that warming. We see this sharp and strong burst of warmth at 10 millibars out of Asia and into the polar region here. And essentially what you're seeing is this lobe of particularly cold air at minus 15 Celsius, the coldest air by a long shot this winter. You see the mild conditions set underneath the center of the high, but look at this rotation of this bitterly cold air underneath. This is a long way out, folks, and this is not guaranteed by any stretch, but nevertheless, it makes physical sense. It's interesting how there is a strong agreement now in the models, and based on the MJO, what is happening with the polar vortex, etc., this makes sense, and it is very, very fascinating stuff. By the time we reach the middle portions of this month, we've got the 850 temperatures below -10 Celsius almost across the entire England and Wales and Ireland region here. Something slightly milder the further north you go. And with these winds, if this happens to be true, we get a particularly cold, dry wind coming off a cold continent. You then see that wind blowing over the relative warmth of the North Sea, picks up moisture. You've got these convective snow bands that set up now anywhere from Kent all the way up to the Scottish borders, the Central Belt, for example. This is a setup here where you could start to see it's always important to not drive home the beast from the East Point, because it's going, people automatically think of the 2018 event. That was an extreme event, but you can still get beasts from the East. We got a somewhat beast from the East back in February of 2021. Then once that carpet of white was laid down on the ground, we've seen high pressure building in, the coldest temperatures for the UK at all since '95, coldest for February since 1955, and it's all very interesting how this pattern is evolving. So let's have a look and see what the ECMWF. Notice here that I'm not showing you temperature or snow projections. It's too far out, but it's getting the idea of the overall trend in the modeling, and that's very important. This is the ECM model here, and you can see that it too is seeing this easterly flow, perhaps not quite as extreme as what the GFS is indicating here, and it is quite a different look on the ECM compared to the GFS. You see this lobe of cold air getting drafted around the eastern and southern flank of the high, but you notice we've not got this same connection. Notice here that the high pressure is too far south on the ECMWF compared to the GFS, and this is the discrepancy in the model that we do need to pay attention to. So that is the ECM. The GFS obviously a lot more bullish with regards to a more extreme outcome overall. Let's have another quick look at some of the models here. We'll look at the GFS ensemble here in terms of the 5-day increments. Zoom out just a little bit here, and we can see what the overall setup is suggesting here. So nothing, like I say, is written in stone by any stretch, but nevertheless, it is a very interesting prospect as we go forward here. So let's look at the upper air heights, 5-day increments. The latest run is now updating, so we'll look at the 6Z run from this morning. This is the upcoming 5-day period, folks. So you can see that the strongest heights, while we've got high pressure largely dominating the continent, we've got the strongest heights up towards the north. In the day 6 through 10, you can see that that high is more concentrated across northern Europe, with lower heights now starting to show up to the south of the UK and Ireland here. Then the 11 to 15 off the GFS ensemble, we've got this high pressure to the north, low pressure to the south, and as a consequence, we're going to have a feed of colder air. I think regardless of if you take out the extremes, I think the theme is overall colder than average. And if we look at the upcoming 5 days of the model, this is how it's looking. So slightly below average now, actually. In yesterday's 5-day first 5 days off the GFS ensemble shown on the live stream, it actually showed mainly a warmer than average UK and Ireland. It's now starting to hint at something colder in the upcoming 5 days. Let's move on to the day 6 through 10, and it is growing colder, which is what I would expect. Once the overall modeling grabs hold of a particular solution, it becomes more confident in that evolving. You start to see the anomaly becoming colder and colder, and I think that is likely to be the case. The 11 to 15 day, notice here it does ease off slightly, but it's still below average in terms of the temperatures. This is now out to the 13th through the 18th of February. So you're still stretching a good part of this month when all is said and done. So let me just see here what else I can show you real quick. Let's have a look at the 10 millibar level here, because I'm interested to see if the trend is showing more and more in terms of this deceleration of winds. So just bear with me a little second here. I'm trying to show you the mean zonal wind of the ECMWF, because this is rather interesting to see whether it's updated and the trend for this deceleration is showing. It is showing a stronger deceleration if you notice here. Then there's a recovery and then there's another weakening taking place, but this is more into the month of March, which is interesting. But look at how we're like off the scale strong at the moment. So the polar vortex and the wind surrounding it is record strong. This thin red line shows record strong. The thick red line in the middle is a climatological average, and then record weak is this bottom red line here. So you've got this sharp deceleration here, this strong warming that takes place from Eurasia towards the pole. Then there's a slight recovery in the ECM. Let's actually look at the weeklies here real quick and see what it's indicating in terms of the 10 millibar level here, because I would be quite interested to see what it's indicating here. So just bear with me a second. 10 millibar temperature weeklies of the ECMWF. So this is the mean temperature in a week by week basis here. So let's look at the Arctic. Should have had all these pulled up beforehand, but nevertheless, I'm getting to it now. You can see here, this is the upcoming week. So this is up to the Monday the 10th of February here, Monday the 3rd through Monday the 10th. Skip out a week from now. There's the strong burst of warming showing up here from Asia towards North America, towards Greenland. Then the following week, we've got essentially warmer than average right across the entire Arctic here, with the strongest warming over the North Atlantic. If you notice, this is the period 17th through the 24th. And again, even as we move out of February into the month of March, we've still got this strong warming showing up by the ECMWF. Let's have a quick look at the weeklies, the GFS at 10 millibar levels. I want to show you this here as well, because it'd be interesting to see what the latest is showing at 10 millibars. So back to polar, northern hemisphere, 10 millibar temperature and heights. So at the moment, we've got a very strong polar vortex at the moment, with the record strong winds surrounding that vortex. Play through the loop as we move towards the end of week 1, beginning of week 2 of February. There's that strong burst of warming showing up, continuing to show this off the modelling here. You could slightly argue that it is a little bit less potent than it was in previous members, but what you would suggest is that between the strong anomalous warmth and the anomalous cold, that is a channel that is created over the top of the pole that may suggest we're transporting some Siberian air over the top and into the Atlantic, into North America, etc. So there is so many things to play for here. You've got a cold pool centered over Europe. That could be one of two things. It could lower heights to the north of the UK and actually be the opposite of what I'm saying, or we could actually see a piece of the polar vortex set up residence over Europe. This is going to be something that's very fascinating to watch going forward. This is the anomaly here, and you can see that we've got this strong burst of warming showing up. Like I say, I don't think it's quite as prominent as what it was in previous runs, but I would fully expect this to come back to the more extreme version going forward here. Do we have a sudden stratospheric warming in terms of major, which is a reversal of the mean zone of winds? That is going to be the question that we will not know until this overall pattern evolves. Remember, it's what's going on within the troposphere underneath that affects the stratosphere, and sometimes it's not until the pattern overall evolves that the modeling gets a better handle as to what's going to take place beyond that. But it's all to play for. It looks as if we're going to turn colder with easterly winds developing towards the end of this working week. The winter forecast overall has played out reasonably well in terms of the mild December, the slightly colder January, and the projection is of a colder than average February. The timing of the mild versus cold has been a little bit out. I did say that we would have a mild first half to January, colder second half to January. It's pretty much been the opposite, where we've had a cold start to January and a milder second half to January. But I think, in fairness, remember, it was the 24th of November that this winter forecast was put out. You know, projecting the timing of cold and mild spells weeks and weeks in advance is nigh on impossible to do, but you get the general idea, and I think things have played out reasonably well overall in terms of the behavior of the pattern. This is the temperature anomalies of CDAS for December, so milder than average. This is January, slightly colder than average. The majority of Europe is actually warmer than average. This is the beginning of February, largely warmer than average across the UK and Ireland. I think this is going to change quite significantly as we go through the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned. If you're enjoying the content here on the channel, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and also leave a comment. It would be good to hear your thoughts. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. See you tomorrow with more. Bye for now.